He picked up the phone and he was very, very quiet. That's so unlike him. Our conversation brought to you by Marcus and Mack, a law firm representing injured people. You can give Bob a call. The 349-WCCS line is available, 349-9227, if you want to ask him a question or two. Bob, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay.
I was quiet because you were speaking. It was the only polite thing to do.
Yeah, well, your mama taught you well. So she did. Okay, so we want to pick up on last week's conversation about pollinators. There's exciting news from the world of pollination, believe it or not, and it comes from the Old Testament King Xerxes, from what I understand. Maybe I don't have every detail correct on that, right?
Yeah, you might be you might be rewriting some of that story.
Right, straight from the Assyrian king. Okay, so what's going on? There's some organization called Xerxes?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And we were, and it's Xerces.
Okay, so it's not Xerxes, the Old Testament king.
Yeah,
So anyway, what's this all about?
Anyhow, they are an organization that does a lot for invertebrate conservation. And so one of the things that they look at is pollinators. And we had started that discussion last week about, well, where do these things go for the winter?
Mm-hmm.
And so we started thinking about that. And, of course, there are, we've talked about stems, some of the pollinators going down in stems of, say, perennial plants, or even, a number of our native plants that are perennial, but we call them herbaceous perennials because the tops die down every year. Mm-hmm. Okay. But the base of the plant remains living. And then in the spring sends up all new shoots again. But a lot of those stems, some plants have hollow stems. Some plants have, they're not hollow, but they have pith inside. So and that pith is more like a spongy material. So you have a harder, more fibery outer part of the stem, and then inside is a little softer and can also almost be a creamy white color. But if you poke at that, it actually gives a little bit. But anyhow, when those stems die, you still have that stiff outer stem part. But inside, a lot of these insects can bore down in there and get down in enough that they're protected for the winter.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So one of the publications that they just have available now is actually, the title of it is Nesting and Overwintering Habitat for Pollinators and Other Beneficial Insects. So that's available on their website, and that can be downloaded. But they kind of outline there maybe a little bit different way of thinking about how we clean things up in the fall.
Oh, yeah?
And different things we can do, or maybe not do, just to help provide habitat for these pollinators and other beneficial insects to overwinter in. Sometimes when we go in the fall and clean everything up, we cut everything back to the ground, we take all the leaves and either put them in the woods or compost them or take them to the recycling center. Or, I guess in some cases, people burn them. Mm-hmm. But maybe we need to rethink that a little bit and leave some of this material there, at least over winter, so that these insects have a place to hunker down. And then they might also crawl in there in the fall and think they're in a safe place, and then we come in and we cut all these stems back to the ground and rake everything out and clean everything up, and in that process, we remove those beneficial insects, and they might have a lesser chance of surviving when that happens.
Okay, so that being the case, what are the plants that we're talking about for the average person in their backyard that we might want to consider come fall? Hey, let's let that one up in case a bee wants to put up for the night or for the winter.
Yeah, so any of those perennial flowers that you have, cone flowers would be an example of that. They might grow to be 2 to 3 feet tall. They're going to bloom for a lot of the summer, but those have some woody stems, but they all die back. So by fall, once we've had a couple good hard freezes, those plants tops all die. We might have seed stalks on the seed heads on the top there that we might leave.
So my zinnias, that's one?
Yeah, that could be one, even though they're gonna die back. So any of those perennial flowers like that. And even smaller ones that still have stems, because there's a variety of sizes of bees and other pollinators, as well as other beneficial insects. So there's varying amounts of sizes. So they kind of pick stems that are, similar to their size. Mm-hmm. So we need some bigger ones. We need some smaller ones. And one of the things that we also can do is just having a diversity of native shrubs and other plants, like elderberries, sumac, raspberries,
okay.
and even some of those plants we see out in the wild, along roadsides and banks and in places. Those are naturally growing, but those, again, the tops die back, and then that also provides then a place for things to overwinter. Mm-hmm. Seed heads, sometimes even the seed heads, which then also attract birds and can be food sources for birds that overwinter here. Goldenrod, that's a real good example of a native plant, and there are some cultivated varieties of that you can buy and plant in your own yard. But we have goldenrod
everywhere.
Yes, yes, and so that's a really good example of a native plant that also provides this habitat along the way.
And they make people sneeze. Say that again.
Joe Pyeweed.
The
one with the purple flowers, August into September.
Oh, okay.
I mean, along the the edges of the roads and where it can still get enough light and things. But that's also a very native plant that's widely scattered around. But that also is another one. When you deadhead things, you can, if you make your cuts at a variety of heights, so maybe don't cut them all the way to the ground for the winter, but leave some of those stems there. So everything from maybe 8 to 24 inches above the ground, just cut those stems back in some of those varying heights within that range. And then that can also give some thicker stems and canes and some varying height there as well for creatures to nest in.
Okay. All righty. Well, that's a great idea. It doesn't look so pretty, but then winter doesn't look so pretty anyway, does it?
Right. And the leaves, bumblebees, they will get into those layers of leaves, actually. The adults, queens, will overwinter, and they'll just get down in amongst the layers of leaves, and there's other insects that do that as well.
You mean tree leaves that fall? That's what you're saying? Oh, okay.
Yes. So, we don't. It's easy to miss all that. They tuck themselves in there, and we don't know they're there. We don't know where they go. Mm-hmm. But yet that's one of the places that they try to nest. So, and if you have a woods near you, then that can provide that habitat for that. If you're more of in an open area or in a development where you don't have that, then I think these practices become more important, because then those insects have to go too far to try and find those little patches of woods, and all that leaf material that naturally builds up there may not happen in your yard or around your neighborhood. So creating those spots and even leaving those leaves over the winter. You might take a little bit of the layer off, depending on the size of the tree and the amount of leaves, but leave a 2 or 3 inch layer there over winter so that those types of insects have a place to spend the winter.
All righty. Well, that's interesting conversation, and you're right. It might make us think a little bit differently about how we clean up our yards in the fall. Mr. Bob Pollock from the Penn State Extension Service, thank you so much for visiting with us this morning.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.